Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. I'm your host, Michael Marchuk,
And I'm Brad Hairston.
and this is our weekly pulse check of AI and automation news. As we do every week, we pull up several articles that are very interesting, and we bring you our thoughts on these articles. And we've got 5 of them today. Brad, are you ready to go?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. This first one's a meaty one, and I've got all kinds of stuff to say about it, but I'm just the host today. This is all on you, buddy. So, first one, it's from Fortune magazine. MIT report 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. So, is this a problem we have related to the technology? Is it a problem related to the fact that there's no GPUs to run these things on? Is it a problem because they just released GPT-5? What's going on here, Brad?
Yeah. Well, I probably saw this headline show up in more posts and articles over the past week than anything else. And they're not the first, third party basically to come forward and say that a lot of AI projects are falling flat. Gartner, I think just about a month ago, said that by 2027, a huge percentage of the projects that are underway around AI are gonna be shut down. So I was interested to hear what MIT had to say, and it has 3 kind of main points that I thought were really of interest. Okay, so first one is that they say it's not so much the quality of the AI model that is causing these projects to fall flat, but it's the learning gap. It's for both tools and organizations. So they're pointing to essentially flawed enterprise integrations. And they say, ChatGPT has worked well because it allows for flexibility in the way people use it. But then when you get to enterprise implementations of AI, it's a totally different ballgame, and you need to treat that very carefully and prepare your users and others. And apparently organizations are not doing that very well. They go on to say that, and the points they made that I thought were the most interesting. They went on to say that another issue is that most of the Gen AI budgets are dedicated to sales and marketing, to the front office, whereas most of the biggest opportunities are still in the back office. Things like eliminating business process outsourcing or cutting external agency costs, streamlining operations, those kinds of things. So I thought that was an interesting observation. And I would agree. Most of the Gen AI pilots I've seen, especially the ones that have been successful, have been more around customer operations or sales and marketing. They're very much in the front office. The second thing they said, which I also found of interest, is that in their study, they found that those that acquired AI tools and models and leveraged third parties were more successful than those that tried to build it themselves. In fact, I think it was 67% of the time they saw more success from those that are using third parties versus trying to do it all by themselves. So those are some interesting points, some good takeaways. I think they're additive to what Gartner and others have said in the last few months. I mean, there's no secret that companies are struggling to get AI off the ground and to meet those expectations that have been created by the hype around it. But I think the first point I made is probably the biggest of all, which is the kind of the change management or the learning gap. I think if that continues to be disregarded, we're going to continue to see a lot of failed implementations.
Yeah, I would agree. To me, this is, again, maybe using one of those old analogies. The car came out and people are still using horses, and they're trying to figure out how to hook their horses up to this car to make it work the way they want it to. It's just a different a different way of working, and the output from it is going to look different. The way you work within your organization, how you integrate into the organization as a whole, it has to look different, or you're going to have a whole lot of failures. So the other part of this, in my mind, is there are 5% of companies that are doing this really well. There are 5% of companies out there who have figured this out. And like you mentioned, of those 5%, they said 67% of those companies are getting help to do that. That's because it's very difficult to run a business in your particular business line and be able to culturally transform to take on a technology like this. So it does make a lot of sense to get someone in who knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, well, let's talk about knows what they're doing. This is a Yahoo story from Extreme Tech talking about Meta. Meta signs a $10 billion cloud deal with Google to expand its AI capacity. Now, given $10 billion sounds like a lot of money, but wasn't Meta dropping like $100 million or $250 million per employee just a little while ago? So that's barely going to get them 100 employees.
Yeah, this is just a rounding error. You know how that goes. So they say your friends are your enemies are your friends. And this is just another weird example of that. The fact that Meta is, paying $10 billion to Google, which has some competitive things, to Meta. Although in the cloud space, Google really considers the AWS and Microsoft Azure to be their biggest competitors. So I guess Meta is a friendly in that context. But this is a 6-year agreement where Meta is going to use Google Cloud to quickly increase their computing capacity for AI projects. They already operate more than 24 data centers, and they're working on more. But many of these are going to take a very long time to get ready. So by adding Google Cloud, Meta can get rolling on this, and they can, it can help fuel their efforts to be more competitive at a faster pace. And we've seen with multiple stories over the last several months, Meta is spending like crazy to try to catch up. They really have a sense of urgency. They realize they are the laggard. And Mark Zuckerberg is doing everything in his power to charge ahead. So on the Google side, as mentioned, they are trying to keep up with AWS and Azure. And Bloomberg Intelligence is cited in the article saying that Google Cloud has much lower token pricing, and that is a strength of theirs. So I'm assuming Meta is taking advantage of that. But the bottom line on this story is Meta is dead serious about catching up with their competitors. They're not afraid to spend big bucks, and we'll continue to see them doing that, I assume, for some while.
I would imagine they would. What's interesting to me, too, is like we talk about Google and Meta and AWS and Microsoft. They're all developing their own chipsets for doing AI. And it's interesting to see that Meta would then turn to Google, who's a strength in this. Certainly their tensor units are very, very popular and very powerful to allow them to have their own AI, the Llama AI, running on that. So again, like you said, it's your friends, your enemies are friends, and it's all kind of weird in Silicon Valley. So
Yep.
Speaking of weird, I know you often connect with AOL. In fact, you've got mail, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This article's from AOL. Your doctor is probably using AI, and you might not even know it. How is that possible?
Well, I think some of them are still keeping it pretty close to the vest and maybe not being as upfront about it. But there's others that are bringing it forward. In fact, I was talking to my father recently. He went to a new doctor, and he said the doctor in his first meeting with my dad pulled out some kind of device. It wasn't his phone, it was something else. And he set it on the table, and he said, if you don't mind, I'm going to have my AI present listening in on this meeting. And my dad, who's a big proponent of AI and high tech and all that, he was fine with it, but I'm sure there's lots of people that aren't fine with it. I, for one, am great with it. In fact, if my doctors are not using it, I would say, why? Why are you not using it? And this article does a great job of laying out some of the best use cases for AI and how they're helping the medical profession. 3 of them they mentioned are transcription of doctor's notes, summarization of patient data, and then surfacing clinical insights. So finding things that a doctor may overlook or that he or she may not have found on their own that need to be brought up, something that may prevent you from, getting worse or developing some kind of disease or other issue. The bottom line is faster scanning, earlier pattern recognition, more accurate diagnoses. I mean, these are all positive things. There's still a huge and very pivotal role for the doctor in the midst of this. It doesn't render the doctor obsolete. It doesn't mean that any of us want to be talking into a machine and getting a readout. And, in the future, we still want a doctor. We want someone that has that medical training. But I think augmentation of AI for the medical professionals is proving to be very, very impactful. In fact, according to a survey that's mentioned in the article, 2/3 of physicians are using AI tools in their practice. And there's more than 1,000 FDA-approved AI tools in healthcare in general. So this is not just a little, few examples here and there. I think it is becoming very, very central to healthcare, at least in the developed countries. But I think it'll continue to spread. And the other point the article talks about is the biomarkers. That's become a big trend in healthcare. You and I probably get a PSA test, every 6 months or a year, as one test that you get when you're older. And those biomarkers are very, very powerful. They're even more powerful when you can feed thousands and thousands of them into an AI model that looks at thousands or millions of cases and can detect patterns and then look at your biomarkers and predict something with a great, degree of accuracy. I mean, this is one of the real positives, I think, of AI. And I know there's people that feel completely on the other side of the spectrum for me, but I definitely like it, and I have no issue with my doctor involving it, and I wish more of them would involve it.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely a benefit. I've certainly seen over the years the whole concept of radiology being one of the biggest early proponents and early adopters of AI because of you mentioned the pattern recognition and seeing things that perhaps a doctor would overlook simply because it can recognize patterns so much better than the human eye. So leveraging that to augment the clinical expertise of a doctor to help them maybe spot something a little sooner and be able to treat it sooner before it gets out of hand. That's always a benefit. So I agree.
Yeah.
I think this could be very interesting. And you're right. If my doctor is not using AI, I want to know why.
Time to move on. Time to get a new doctor.
All right. So speaking of creative uses for AI, our next article comes from NBC News. It's titled, "A Hacker Used AI to Automate an Unprecedented Cybercrime Spree," Anthropic says. It says the company behind the Claude chatbot said it caught a hacker using its chatbot to identify, hack, and extort at least 17 companies. This is a new use case for the AI that we've been playing with?
Yes, this is on we just showed or highlighted a very positive use of AI. This goes to the other side and talks about a very negative, a very shocking and scary story, which is a hacker who was determined to be outside the U.S. Using Claude to basically hack and extort at least 17 companies. And of those companies, one was a defense contractor, one was a financial institution, and then multiple healthcare providers. I mean, none of that's good, right? They
No.
stole social security numbers, bank details, some patient sensitive medical information. So yeah, this is the epitome of what we don't want AI to do, to enable the bad actors, the hackers and such, to leverage the technology and doing what it does best, to not just hack into them, but also to research companies, find weaknesses. I mean, you read through this article and it's really scary the way that they used Claude, and they didn't have to trick Claude or do anything unethical with Claude, but just the way that they used it and prompted it to expose things from these companies, and then kind of identify their targets, and then use Claude to write ransom notes and write letters or emails to the companies telling them what they had access to so they could extort them. I mean, it's really, really troubling. And I think this falls on the Anthropic and the companies and on that side, I think, to figure out how to mitigate and prevent this. I know that they don't want to prevent, they want the broadest audience to be able to leverage their platform. They're in a hotly competitive space, but if they see prompts that are of this nature, they've got to find a way to shut down those users or surface it to the authorities or whatever. And I know that's a fine line they walk, because they really don't want to make judgments on the prompts and what have you. But man, this is a tricky one. What are your thoughts, Michael?
Well, they mentioned in here that we have robust safeguards and multiple layers of defense for detecting this kind of misuse, but determined actors sometimes attempt to evade our systems through sophisticated techniques. This is Jacob Klein, the head of threat intelligence for Anthropic.
Yeah.
So this is something that, I keep thinking of the antivirus, escalation. There's a antivirus tool that can detect a threat, and then the virus makers change something or allow it to be polymorphic, and then all of a sudden the antivirus can't detect it anymore, and we got to fight. It's always an escalating arms race. I really think this is going to be a continued kind of threat as we go forward. Just because of how these LLMs operate. I mean, there's only so many things you can do to prevent them. And it's almost like, in my mind, it's almost like good social engineering. People trying to get information where they shouldn't get information and ask questions in a different way to maybe get a response they're actually looking for, but pose it in a way that doesn't look as threatening. So again, creative use for sure. But it does make it a little more troubling to see how this could be used in ways that perhaps weren't intended.
Right.
So, and our last one is from Mint. Book authors settle copyright lawsuits with an AI company, Anthropic. So, as you know, we've talked about this several times. Intellectual property laws were at a point where, it's kind of iffy whether or not using the books or technical information that's available would be allowed to train an AI platform. There's been a couple different fair use cases on this, but in this case here, these authors decide to go forward and settle with Anthropic. Tell us what happened.
Well, what's shocking about this is that back in June, the judge who was ruling on this case actually came to the defense of Anthropic and said that what they were doing with these books and the material that's in question was fair use, that they weren't just copying it and putting it into other outputs from the model. They were transforming it in a way that it was essentially new content. So it may have read a book and borrowed a pattern or basically used it to be trained in a way that it impacted the output, but the output was transformed enough that it wasn't a copyright infringement. So that ruling was in June, but the judge still wanted a trial to take place where Anthropic would go through and explain how they're using this content, how they're feeding it into their model. What kind of safeguards and such are they putting in place? And I guess the output of that is maybe they looked guiltier than they seemed back in June, because here we have a settlement. And I'm sure, I assume it's because Anthropic wants these authors to go away happy and stop using terms like plagiarism and large scale theft in the same sentence with Anthropic. I did go back and look at the authors who were involved in this suit, and I thought maybe one or two of them would be like well-known authors, but they're really not. There's 3 authors, and they've written a combined 10 books. Only one of them, Andrea Bartz, is cited as a New York Times bestseller. She's written 5 novels. The other 2, I look like they've had limited to no success with their books. So it's a little strange that these 3 came together, however that happened, and then hired a high-powered lawyer to go after Anthropic. And, now they're walking away with a settlement that hasn't been disclosed. But I really thought it would be, an author that had more at stake and had more of their reputation or more works that were being violated. But these are 3, lesser known authors. I guess they just chose the right lawyer, and they've had success with this.
There's 2 things with this. One is, like you mentioned, they weren't necessarily well known. But if you look at it from the merits, it doesn't really matter whether they know you or not. My book is a copyrighted book. It doesn't matter the commercial impact of it is. The fact is it's copyrighted and you took it from me was the biggest issue.
Yeah.
And obviously they said, the judge indicated that no, actually this is considered fair use. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, which I still think is a little more in the gray area of this lawsuit, is the fact that they have trying to figure out how they got these books, because based on what they had mentioned, they said the company was still on the hook and was scheduled to go to trial over how to acquire these books by downloading them from online shadow libraries of pirated copies. So maybe the fair use was okay of the content itself, but the way they obtained the content, now it gets into a little grayer area of whether or not that was the way they should have.
You're probably right. Yeah, very shady the way that they got access to the books. And I think these authors were probably surprised that someone, even an AI model, had read their books, and it caught them off guard. And then when they realized it was an AI model, then they changed their strategy. But
it's very likely they made more money at the lawsuit than they would on selling their books.
I guarantee you that is the case. That is definitely the case.
Well, that's all we got for this episode of our Transform Now Pulse Check. As always, we have a great guest every week, and we encourage you to listen to that one. Make sure you subscribe and find out more about what's coming down the path here. So until then, we'll see you next time on the Pulse Check.